Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working as a sound engineer for about 8 years when I landed what seemed like the gig of a lifetime. A massive 10-day music and arts festival in London's Docklands, complete with 15 stages scattered across the waterfront. The festival was meant to celebrate the redevelopment of East London's former dock area, once home to one of the world's largest port complexes. They'd transformed this industrial wasteland into a gleaming showcase of modern development, and this festival was supposed to be the crown jewel of that transformation. I arrived on site 2 days before the festival kicked off, ready to set up my equipment and get familiar with the venue. That's when I first encountered her, the woman from the Docklands development team who'd been assigned to oversee our stage operations. From the moment she opened her mouth, I knew we were in trouble. She had absolutely no experience with outdoor events, yet she acted like she'd invented live entertainment. Worse still, she treated the entire crew like we were beneath her notice. By the end of the first day, she'd already reduced 2 of my riggers to tears with her constant criticism and impossible demands. The festival organizers turned out to be equally incompetent. They'd scheduled events haphazardly, leaving us with half-empty performance slots and confused audiences. Our stage was licensed to run from midday until 10 o'clock p.m., but most days we barely had enough acts to fill 6 hours. Tuesday brought a new level of chaos. A full-size Yamaha concert grand piano arrived for Thursday evening's Victorian Music Hall performance, which featured a very famous film and television actress as the special guest. The piano was worth close to £100,000, and storing it backstage for 2 days in the summer heat was absolutely insane. The ground was nothing but hardcore rubble fragments that kicked up clouds of dust, and we were doing our best to protect this incredibly expensive instrument with whatever tarps and covers we could find. Thursday afternoon finally arrived, and the cast showed up at 1 o'clock p.m. for their production rehearsal. Everything was going smoothly until 1:30 p.m., when our star performer arrived wearing dark sunglasses and an immaculate outfit. Working with big celebrities can go one of 2 ways. Either they turn into complete divas who demand the impossible, or they're reasonable professionals who work with what you've got. I held my breath, waiting to see which way this would go. Her first request was that we move the piano off the front of the stage so she could maintain eye contact with both her pianist and the audience while standing down stage. The stage was 4.5 feet high, and moving a concert grand would have required at least 8 people, and probably would have knocked the tuning completely out of whack. I explained that moving the piano would violate our health and safety regulations, because it would block the fire lane and one of the emergency exits. I quickly suggested an alternative where we could position the piano as far downstage as possible while she moved 3 or 4 feet upstage. That way she could still take cues from her musical director while connecting with the audience. The tension was thick. After what felt like forever, she agreed that she could work with that arrangement. I nearly collapsed with relief, but my reprieve was short-lived because that's when Karen showed up. She immediately zeroed in on our star, practically bouncing with excitement at meeting a celebrity. Her voice took on this sickeningly sweet tone when she announced that she would be taking personal charge of the star's every need from now on. She made it clear that the crew should keep their place as hired help. My stage manager was sweeping nearby when she said this, and I watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped the broom handle. For a moment I thought he might actually use it as a weapon. I stepped between them as casually as I could and quietly told him she wasn't worth it. Karen walked off, leaving our star standing there with her mouth hanging open. The star asked if that woman was for real, and I told her she had no idea what we'd been dealing with. I gave her a quick rundown of the past week's disasters, and suddenly everything changed. She burst into laughter, and from that moment on, we were all on first-name terms. She became one of us. We ran a full technical rehearsal from 3 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock p.m., sorted out all our cues, and then headed to the beer tent with the cast for a late lunch and drinks. Everything was running smoothly. The show was scheduled to start at 7:30 p.m. Around 6 o'clock p.m., Karen reappeared to check on things. She immediately noticed that we had all the tent sides raised to get some air circulation going. Remember, it was midsummer and pushing into the mid-80s. Karen demanded that we lower all the tent flaps immediately because she wanted a proper theater atmosphere and thought the light spilling through was ruining the effect. I pointed out that this would significantly raise the temperature inside the venue, but she said she didn't care and ordered us to do it anyway. Against our better judgment, we complied. At 7 o'clock p.m., 850-seat coaches pulled up outside. Out poured an entire army of senior citizens, many with walking frames, shuffling across the rocky ground toward our tent. We found out later that the organizers had forgotten to advertise the event anywhere and had desperately handed out free tickets at local senior centers just to get an audience. So now we had 400 elderly people frantically fanning themselves when the temperature climbed higher and higher. I started the show with everything running perfectly, but I could see the mercury rising on the thermometer strapped to my sound desk. It was so hot, I'd stripped down to just my shorts. By the end of the first act, we'd hit 94 degrees Fahrenheit. The elderly audience members were clearly in distress, and the two first aid volunteers stationed by the stage looked horrified. The organizers hadn't even provided water for the audience. I climbed down from my tower and found the rigging crew. I ordered them to raise the tent sides immediately, but Karen was right there, and she wasn't having it. She insisted that the sides stay down because she was in charge and her instructions were to be followed absolutely. That was it. Diplomacy went straight out the window. I told her that the crew had legal responsibility for health and safety in this venue, not her. I explained that we had the authority to implement any procedure necessary to ensure everyone's safety, and I was exercising my authority under the Health and Safety at Work Act to fix this situation right now. Karen got right in my face and screamed that she was in charge. That was strike 3. I looked over at 2 security guards who'd been watching the whole thing with huge grins on their faces. They stepped up on either side of her and escorted her off the premises while she complained like a banshee. By the time the second act started, we'd gotten the temperature down to a manageable 70 degrees. The audience was visibly relieved, and the rest of the show went off perfectly. After the performance, the entire cast and crew headed back to the beer tent for well-deserved drinks. Our star was right there with us, chatting and laughing like we'd known each other for years. Then Karen reappeared, announcing that the star needed to come to the VIP reception for the Docklands executives immediately. With some regret at having our fun cut short, we said goodbye to our new friend when Karen led her away. Less than 10 minutes later, our star stormed back into the beer tent with thunder written all across her face. She told us that Karen had dragged her to a so-called VIP party that turned out to be nothing but 2 plates of curled-up ham sandwiches and cheap wine from the grocery store. She asked how Karen had gotten this job in the first place. She explained that she'd given Karen a proper earful and came back to the beer tent because she'd much rather drink with us. She called the bartender over and bought drinks for the entire crew. We spent the rest of the evening swapping stories like old friends. She told us about her career, and she actually listened to our tales from the road. When we tried to buy her a drink, she refused completely and picked up the entire bar tab. She said that since we'd had to put up with that evil witch all week, the least she could do was get us drinks. When her chauffeur arrived at the end of the evening, she hugged each of us goodbye. When she got to me, she planted a big kiss on my lips. I told her she'd just fulfilled a boyhood dream, which got another one of her amazing laughs. She told me not to let that witch get me down and to leave it to her. A few weeks later, Karen had been fired from her 5-figure position. Apparently, our star's agent had torn the organizers apart for the way she'd been treated. You don't mess with someone of that caliber without facing serious results. I teach dance and have been doing it for about 8 years now. The studio where I work focuses on teaching kids proper technique and helping them fall in love with dance. Most parents drop their kids off and come back an hour later. Some stick around in the cafe down the hall, but none of them ever interfere with my classes, except for Karen. Karen has been a problem since day one, when her daughter started classes 6 months ago. The first red flag was when she mentioned she used to dance and had a grade 3 certification. For context, grade 3 is basically beginner level, but Karen acts like she trained at some fancy academy. She insists on staying for every single lesson. No other parent does this. The studio has a viewing area with glass windows specifically so parents can watch without being inside the actual classroom. But Karen comes right into the studio and plants herself in the corner. Then she starts her commentary. Karen calls out instructions to her daughter constantly. Most of the time, her instructions are completely wrong. When I tell the kids to step with their right foot, she yells for her daughter to use the left. When I demonstrate a turn going clockwise, she shouts for counterclockwise. The other kids hear her and get confused. They start looking back and forth between me and Karen like they do not know who to listen to. Her daughter is actually incredible. She is only 10 years old but has been dancing since she was 4. The kid has natural rhythm and control that I rarely see in someone so young. She understands music and picks up choreography faster than kids twice her age. She clearly loves being here and always comes in excited for class. If it were not for her mother, she would be a joy to teach. But Karen ruins everything. She constantly tells other parents how her daughter is obviously the most talented in the class. She talks about how if we were a competitive team, her daughter would win every single contest. We are not even a competitive studio. These are just regular lessons for kids who want to learn dance. But Karen has clearly watched too many episodes of those reality shows and thinks this is some kind of cutthroat environment. She complains that I do not give her daughter enough individual attention. She suggests that I should be featuring her daughter more in our end-of-year recital. She even asked if I could create special advanced routines just for her daughter. The worst part is the backseat teaching. During every class, Karen stands there calling out corrections and suggestions. The kids have learned to ignore her, but it still creates chaos. When I am trying to teach a sequence and there is another voice giving completely different instructions, the students get confused and make mistakes. I have tried everything to get her to stop. I have asked her politely to step outside. She just refuses and keeps doing what she wants. My teaching assistant and I have both talked to her multiple times. She will agree to be quiet, then last maybe 10 minutes before she starts up again. By the next week, she is back to her old behavior like our conversation never happened. I even went to the director of the school for help. He told me that unless he gets multiple formal complaints from other parents, there is nothing he can do. The parents do complain to me all the time. They are frustrated that their kids are getting distracted and confused during lessons they are paying for. But when I tell them to complain directly to the director, apparently none of them follow through. Or at least not enough of them to make the director take action. He keeps telling me that Karen is technically a paying customer and has the right to watch her daughter's class. So I have been stuck dealing with this situation for months. Last Tuesday, everything finally came to a head. We were working on a routine that the kids had been practicing for weeks. They were doing really well and almost had it memorized. Then Karen started her usual commentary from the corner. She told one student to lean the wrong direction during a balance sequence. She yelled for another kid to add extra spins that were not part of the choreography. But the worst was when she told her own daughter to launch off the wrong foot during a jump combination. Her daughter followed the instruction because that is what kids do when their parent tells them something. She jumped at the wrong time and collided with another student. Both kids fell down hard. Nobody got seriously hurt, but they were shaken up and the other students all stopped dancing to see if they were okay. I was so frustrated that I just snapped. Without thinking, I looked right at Karen and asked if she wanted to come up and teach the lesson herself. I meant it as a rhetorical question to highlight how ridiculous her behavior was. But this woman actually said yes and walked straight to the front of the classroom. Karen started talking the kids through the steps and got everything completely wrong. She was telling them to move their arms in ways that would throw off their balance. She had them facing the wrong direction for half the sequence. Her own daughter looked mortified. The poor kid was on the verge of tears and kept trying to signal for her mom to stop. I shouted over Karen that we were taking a 10-minute break and would add the time to the end of class. Then I walked out of the studio. I went straight to the director's office. He was not there, but he always keeps a stack of comment cards outside his door for parents to fill out. I grabbed about half the stack and went back toward my classroom. Several parents were standing outside in the hallway. They had heard the commotion through the door. I handed them the comment cards and explained that if they wanted Karen gone, this was how they could make it happen. I told them to fill out the cards and put them in the box outside the director's office. Then I went to the cafe where more parents usually sit while waiting for their kids. I did not even need to explain who I was talking about. Every single one of these parents had witnessed Karen screaming instructions at their children and talking over the teacher they were paying. I put the rest of the comment cards on a table and gave them the same instructions about filling them out and returning them to the director. When I got back to my classroom, Karen was still teaching. My teaching assistant had tried to regain control, but Karen kept interrupting and correcting her. The damage was already done. The kids who had known the routine perfectly were now stumbling over each other. They were confused about which version of the steps was correct. What had been a smooth, synchronized performance was now a mess of missed cues and wrong directions. It took the rest of the class just to get them back to where they had been before Karen took over. Yesterday, the director sent me an email. He said he had received multiple complaints about Karen's disruptive behavior during classes. Based on these complaints, he was contacting her to let her know that she was no longer allowed to sit in on lessons. She could wait in her car or in the cafe, but she was banned from the actual studio. If she tried to come in, I now had permission to remove her immediately. If she caused any more problems after that, only her daughter's father would be allowed to bring her to future classes. I had my next lesson with her daughter today. For the first 5 minutes, I thought maybe Karen had actually listened to the director's warning. She was standing outside in the hallway, not making any noise. Then she walked right into the studio and took her usual spot in the corner. Within 30 seconds, she was calling out instructions again. I immediately stopped the class and told her she needed to leave the room. Karen protested that she was just watching her daughter's lesson. I explained that she was banned from being in this room and needed to go to the cafe or wait outside. She argued that she could not be kicked out because she pays for these lessons. I told her that I could remove her because the director had given me permission and said she needed to leave right away. Karen complained that this was ridiculous and said she was helping these kids learn. I told her that she was confusing the students and disrupting my class and said I would call security if she did not leave. She finally walked out. But apparently she went straight to the front desk and caused a scene. The receptionist told me later that Karen was yelling about how I was targeting her and being unprofessional. She demanded to speak to the director and threatened to pull her daughter from classes. The director stood by his decision. Karen is now permanently banned from the entire art school. I was in my final year of engineering college when this whole thing went down. Every semester when exam schedules got announced, we had to download these exam forms, fill them out, and submit them to the college office. These forms were basically our ticket to take the exams. No form meant no hall ticket, and no hall ticket meant you couldn't sit for your exams at all. The university always gave us 2 weeks to get this done, which was more than enough time for anyone with half a brain. But us guys, we were idiots. We'd procrastinate until the very last day while the girls had their stuff sorted out from day one. I was one of those idiots standing in line on the final submission day. The college had set up 2 separate lines like they always did for crowd control. One for boys, one for girls. When I joined the boys' line around noon, there were already 30 guys ahead of me. The girls' line had maybe 5 people total. After standing there for what felt like forever, checking my phone every 2 minutes, and shifting my weight from foot to foot, I finally made it to the front section. 90 minutes of my life gone, but at least I could see the submission desk now. Only 4 guys ahead of me. That's when this whole drama started. There was this girl at the back of the girls' line, and she was holding a clipboard with her exam form clipped to it just minding her own business, and then this guy comes out of nowhere. Not from either line, just walks up to her like he owns the place. Without even a hello or excuse me, he slaps his exam form down on top of hers on the clipboard. He told her to submit his form too in the rudest way possible. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Like she was his personal assistant or something. I'm watching this thinking she's about to tear his head off. I mean, the audacity was incredible. Here we all were, following the system, waiting our turns, and this guy just decides the rules don't apply to him. But she didn't explode. Instead, she looked at his form, looked at him, and gave him the sweetest smile I've ever seen. She told him it wasn't a problem and that she'd help him out. I was confused. Maybe they knew each other? Maybe she was just being nice. I mean, technically, you could submit someone else's form, but you'd have to go back and wait in line again afterward. Still seemed weird that she'd do a favor for someone who'd just been so rude to her. The guy looked pretty pleased with himself. He stepped back and just stood there waiting, like he'd figured out some genius life hack. I went back to waiting for my turn, but I kept looking over because something felt off about the whole situation. The girl's line moved pretty quickly since there weren't many people in it. I watched as she moved up person by person, still carrying both forms on her clipboard. The guy was just standing off to the side, probably thinking about how clever he was. When there were only 2 people left ahead of me in the boys' line, she reached the front of the girls' line. I could see her clearly now when she approached the clerk. She handed over her form first. The clerk processed it, stamped it, and filed it away. Form submitted successfully. She thanked the clerk politely and stepped away from the desk. Then she walked straight over to where the guy was standing. He perked up when he saw her coming, probably expecting her to tell him his form was submitted too. He had this smug look on his face, like everything had worked out perfectly for him. She stopped right in front of him, still holding his exam form in her hand. She held it up so he could see it clearly, gave him that same sweet smile from before, and then opened her fingers. The form fluttered to the ground like a leaf. She didn't say a single word, just turned around and walked away. For a moment, nobody moved. The guy stared down at his form on the floor like he couldn't process what had just happened. Then it hit everyone at once what she'd done. The genius of it was beautiful. If she'd told him to get lost right away, he would have just joined the boys' line with about 30 people ahead of him. Instead, she let him think he'd found an easy way out. She carried his form with her, made him wait and watch, and by the time she'd submitted her own form and dropped his, the boys' line had grown to over 50 people. The whole crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Even some of the guys in line with me were clapping. Everyone had seen his rude behavior, and everyone appreciated the perfect justice of what just happened. The guy's face went through about 5 different colors. He bent down, picked up his form, and looked around at all the faces staring at him. Some people were still laughing. Others were shaking their heads at him. Without a word, he turned and walked straight out of the building. Didn't even try to join the line. I have no idea when he finally managed to submit his form. Probably had to come back another day and pay the late submission fine on top of it. Served him right. She handled it perfectly. No screaming, no confrontation, no drama. Just a sweet smile and perfect timing. She let his own arrogance trap him, then delivered what he deserved with style. I finally got to submit my form about 20 minutes later. The clerk processed my paperwork without any issues and wished me luck on my upcoming exams. When I walked out, I was still thinking about what I'd witnessed. That girl had turned what could have been an ugly argument into a masterclass in karma. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.